Okay, so, all right, so are we ready? Vincent, are you ready?
Yeah, I think so. Let's see. Let me
Yeah,
share this here and let's see. Where is this? Okay. And
I have my backpack right there.
okay,
I think it's behind the painting.
okay,
great.
can you see this here?
I can see it.
Okay, perfect.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, so I'm going to just introduce you really quickly. So for those that don't know, good morning, everyone. I'm Jennifer Frias. I'm the director and curator of the Begovich Gallery here at Cal State Fullerton, and thanks for joining us today. We have an amazing artist and lecturer, Vincent Ramos. But before we get started, because we're also televising this, showing this via public beyond Cal State Fullerton, I'd like to also always begin by acknowledging that, we're on the traditional, ancestral, and unceded lands of our Gabrielino Tongva Nation, and we want to express our gratitude to the Indigenous land caretakers for protecting the sacred site where we gather today, although virtual. I also want to acknowledge that today's event is hosted in partnership with Mariana Pomonis, Assistant Professor in Art Education. And this lecture is organized in partnership with the Visual Arts Department and is made possible with the generous support of the College of the Arts, the Art Alliance, and the Instructional Related Activities Grant. As your professor mentioned, this program is being recorded and it will be made available to you via Mary, I believe, just right after class, right? And so we're going to start. What I'm going to do is just go ahead and introduce Vincent Ramos. We'll have him present his amazing work. And at the end, we'll conclude with a Q&A led by your TA, Angelica. So with that said, just a little bit about Vincent. Vincent Ramos received his MFA from Cal Arts. He participated in numerous notable exhibitions that included A Universal History of Infamy at LACMA, made in LA in 2012 at the Hammer, Outsider Art, others from elsewhere doing something altogether different, sort of, at 18th Street Arts Center in Santa Monica. And he is a recipient of numerous awards, such as the COLA Individual Artist Fellowship, the Friends of Contemporary Art, a Mid-Career Fellowship, and the California Community Foundation Emerging Artist Fellowship. His most recent installation debuted at Frieze LA in 2020, and it was based on his research in the Paramount Pictures archive, and it examined how the film industry portrayed Chicano and Mexican culture over the course of the 20th century. This was also the subject that he explored during his residency at the Hammer as part of their Hammer projects in 2011 and 2012. And with that said, Vincent Ramos.
Great. Well, thank you. Thank you all for having me today. I was able to take the day off of work, so thank you for giving me that as well. I'm gonna kind of breeze through things here a little bit, especially with this project, which is my kind of project I did when I was in graduate school. And I usually end up talking about this project way too long, so I'm going to try to condense it here. But very quickly, when I was in graduate school, Cal Arts, 2005, I started a project that looked at popular music in the Vietnam War. And it was based on an article I read many years ago that talked about music and Vietnam War films and how the music was incorrect based on the kind of racial dynamics of the soldiers, and that the music that was actually used in these films was based on the memories of the actual directors who made the films, like Francis Ford Coppola, John Milius, people like this, who were of that generation but were in college at the time and not in Vietnam. So I did this project. It was very personal to me. I had 5 uncles of mine were in the Vietnam War, and one of them died there in June of 1967. My dad's one of my dad's younger brothers, and so I did this project, and it turned out that, so long story short, a brother of mine was doing some research on his own because he was named after this uncle and stumbled upon some information on the internet. He in turn told me about it. I in turn contacted the person who put it up, and thus I started this dialogue with this veteran who knew him and was there when he was killed. And I don't know if, for people that are not familiar, and I don't know if it's any different now, but when a soldier died back then, they really didn't give you information how this person died or how your family member died. They just would tell you that they were, killed in action or missing in action or whatever. So, almost 50 years later, and like my dad didn't know what was going on in terms of, the details surrounding his death. And so it was good to kind of create this bridge through art of getting this generation and these people in contact with one another again after all these years. So that kind of culminated in actually meeting these individuals, going to Washington, D.C., taking my parents. And this is when I was at Cal Arts, I think my final year, for this reunion that they had. And so this image here is, I took it the night of when we got to Washington, D.C. It's a blurry photo. It was a blurry photo to begin with, but I think I made it even blurrier with this little crappy digital camera that I had at the time. But my uncle is there on the left. And we'll kind of revisit this image again at the end of this little talk about this project. So I did a lot of drawing at that time. I still do. I'm totally kind of invested in works on paper. So drawing, collage, and anything I kind of work with. In doing, I started drawing some of the portraits based on some of the snapshots like this, but they were kind of crappy and just a kind of reflection of the moment. They were shot with Polaroids and really cheap film, and so I started using these images of these musicians, since I was doing this project about music, as kind of surrogates, if you will. And what happened during that weekend leading up to my uncle's death was a thing called the Monterey Pop Festival, which was a very famous rock festival that happened, really the kind of first one that kind of kicked off the 60s and the summer of love, blah, blah, blah. Kind of went off without a hitch. It introduced a lot of musicians to America, like the Jimi Hendrix Experience, The Who, people like this, Janis Joplin. After this event, they all became very well known. So I'm showing you an image to kind of contrast some of the images that, I was receiving or that I had. And I found these kind of hard to kind of emulate or render. So I stuck with these images of these musicians. And this is Brian Jones of the Rolling Stones, who was there not as a performer, but as a spectator at the Monterey Pop Festival. And these are newspaper images, taken by professional photographers. I found them much easier to kind of render, and in terms of the likeness and the person and the period, they were satisfactory to me at that moment. Here's David Crosby on the left, John Phillips from the Mamas and the Papas on the right. A lot of these borders and things I would pick up from albums of the period. Not even really from rock albums. They were more for like just really strange stuff. I don't know, polka records and all kinds of other stuff. But I like the graphics a lot. And I use them as borders for these drawings. I did a few iterations of this piece, two at Cal Arts, and then a third one I was invited by, she was a student at the time. She actually came to a, what do we have? Open Studios at Cal Arts, and saw the work and connected with the work because her father was in Vietnam as well. And she was a woman, her name is Natalie Herron. She's an art historian now, a graduate of UCLA, and teaches at the University of Houston. But we did a little show together, and offsite out of Cal Arts, my first show post-graduate school. And I wanted to kind of make this kind of, at that time I was doing installation work, somewhat performative. There was a lot of kind of performance, kind of history and people doing performance kind of around. That's kind of quelled a bit, but it was pretty popular then. And there was a lot of kind of dialogue with folks. And so I did this piece that was kind of quasi-memorial, quasi-performative, where I put 500 sandbags inside the gallery. And it was a very small gallery in Westwood. So there wasn't really a lot of space. And I'll show you some more examples of it. What's interesting about these talks, and I've been, since the pandemic, I've actually done quite a few. And most of them virtual, but I've been able to think about a lot of work that I hadn't thought about in a long time. And, the work is always kind of being informed by things past and present. And so I didn't realize at the time, but this piece, which is by the artist Alan Capro, took place in 1967, that same year. And it was done here in Los Angeles in conjunction with Capro's retrospective at the Pasadena Art Museum. And it was called Fluids, and they were making these structures. I think there was 5 or 6 of them all around the city, done with blocks of ice. But in terms of the aesthetic and the action, it's very similar to the thing that I was doing. And of course, this happened at that moment. Here's the original poster for it. At that time as well, there was a lot of interest in Capro, and culminated in a show here in Mocha. And I took part in some performative stuff with that as well. So, but I didn't really put the pieces together until I started looking at things and in conjunction with putting these talks together. So, here's some great imagery of things being these things being constructed. This was actually shot by the actor Dennis Hopper, who was a actor. A few years later, he would go on to direct Easy Rider, but always hung around with the artists in LA. I like this shot of what I was doing with on the left is my friend artist Jeff Brady, and Natalie Heron, who was the curator. And then it culminated in a very kind of quiet performance with myself and Natalie, where we wrote down these song titles all around the gallery space. When I started working on this project, I reached out to this man, Bill Reynolds, who has since passed away. And that's another thing I was thinking about today, was got a lot of these veterans that I interviewed, and I initially sent out a letter to them. And I got a letter in return most of the times, or a phone call. I talked about popular music at that time, and I had asked them kind of what their memories were of music, and I told them who I was and who I was related to. And so it was their memories of music, because there was a soundtrack in this installation as well, as there was in most of the other iterations of it. But these are the songs that they remembered during their time in Vietnam. And in comparing these songs to the songs that we would hear in films about Vietnam, a lot, it really, in this instance, it was kind of based on when they were there. So, and going back to this event, the Monterey Pop Festival, it really was a kind of kickoff point to the kind of psychedelic era, and much more, music that we associate with the 60s, like the Beatles and Jimi Hendrix and all these other things, The Who, all these other bands. And really, when my uncle and these guys were there, like I said, they were there right as this was kind of taking place. So kind of prior to that, and things happened very quickly in terms of culture at that time, and pop culture. They were really listening to a lot of AM music and a lot of kind of regional music, or in terms of the African American soldiers, they were listening to a lot of jazz, and so it, in terms of the article and the premise of the article and the argument, it was there was some truth to it, but it was really kind of based on when the soldiers were there. So here's some more installation shots. It was a very small space, very cramped space. And here's the last image that I wanted to show you from that, from this project, was this is the back of that photo. So those four men that were in that picture, my uncle was killed in the summer of '67. This guy Vidovic, lost his foot that summer. This other guy was shot in the head later on that same day, but according to this little paper, lived. And the other gentleman was shot in the knee. So, it was pretty horrific, and dealing with a lot of these veterans, a lot of this trauma was still there, 50 years later. It was a real learning experience for me, but it was also a way for me to, create this space where I could, be of assistance to like my dad, especially, and just my family to kind of get some closure on this event. So it was important in that way as well. So another project, this was made in LA in 2012. Here the poets chop their fingers served under glass. I do a lot of work about Los Angeles. I do a lot of kind of regional work. I'm born and raised here. In some instances, I'm like third generation. So I've always had this kind of interest in my hometown and the city. I grew up in Venice, where I'm kind of currently at right now. And as did my mother, who just celebrated her 80th birthday, but has lived here all her life. And so I did this project, this kind of research project for the Hammer that dealt with Venice, and specifically the kind of Cold War period. So to give you some background on my family, my grandfather was a trash man here in Venice in the 40s and 50s to about the early 60s. And as a result, I always grew up around objects and things and old stuff and old papers and just all kinds of stuff that was really formative for me, and still things that I'm kind of collecting till this day. I should mention I am kind of an avid collector of stuff as well. And so that kind of informs the work too. Also on top of this kind of familial history and kind of cultural history, the regional history is such that in Venice in the 40s, not actually more in the 50s, I should say, 50s and 60s, there was a whole slew of artists here. And within that, there was a group of people who were doing more assemblage or found object, mixed media work, collage, this type of thing. George Herms, Wallace Berman, were out here, guys that lived out here, Ben Talbert, and there was another artist whose name escapes me, but we're doing stuff, with found objects, which is something I've always, that was kind of one of my first loves in art, was discovering this work. And so I work with a lot of archives. I work a lot with my own kind of personal or familial archives. When someone dies in my family, now they know to kind of let me know before they throw things away or whatever, donate stuff. So, and I use these things. So here's a photo of my grandparents. My grandparents, my mom grew up on the Venice canals, which is now this kind of like, I don't know, the Beverly Hills of Venice, if you will. But when they were there, I think my grandparents got there in the mid 30s. It was pretty run down, and it was like, one of the poorer areas of Venice. The canals, were like swampy and all screwed up. And, the houses were these little kind of little cottages and things. And so, a lot of my family grew up there, or I had a lot of family there. And my mom grew up there as a kid. So this is on the canals here, and this is probably the early 50s. This is my grandparents. I did want to bring up this kind of aesthetic that kind of relates to the Mexican American community, Chicano community, and that is something that you may or may not have heard of before, called rascuache, the rascuache aesthetic, which is really kind of if you had to define it, it would be like kind of working with what you have, if you find something, the found object within this context is very important. And I like that in relationship to this image, because if you notice those ducks there, I have no doubt that, my grandfather probably found those ducks on his trash route, these like duck decoys, and brought them home, and now they're used as like a lawn, some sort of lawn decoration or lawn ornaments or something. So it's that kind of concept. And with my grandfather being a trash man, this kind of rascuache aesthetic, which I don't think was even a thing back then. This term comes later. It was just kind of inherent, and it's become part of kind of the culture. So if you're anywhere where there's a large Mexican American population, you'll see these kind of homemade altars or these other things. This is kind of that aesthetic, which is still very much a part of the culture today, and really is kind of a part of my work as well. I did, when I was working, I did this talk a couple months ago at Pasadena. When I was looking at this had popped up. And so to kind of give you a sense of kind of where we're at as a community now, it's like this kind of, big, very expensive place to live, very exclusive and blah, blah, blah. But, and a lot of the people that I once knew here are no longer here. But there's a skeleton crew of us here that are kind of people that have been here for a long, long time. Here's a picture of my grandfather on the left. This is actually an image on the right of the actor Charlton Heston and his kind of brown face for the Orson Welles film Touch of Evil, which is, I believe, from 1958. And to give you a little bit of background, if you haven't seen the film, it's kind of considered like the last noir film. It's actually a really amazing film, and it's set in this kind of border town. But the studios at that point wouldn't let Welles do a film in Mexico, I guess just because of cost or whatever. So he settled on Venice as this Mexican border town. So if you see the film, you see images of Venice during that time. I always thought that was interesting in relationship to my own history. But to the left is the set for Touch of Evil on the Venice boardwalk, which you see in the film. And the people in that little photo there are the artist Wallace Berman, his wife Shirley Berman, who actually just died a few weeks ago, and their son Tosh Berman, who's still very much around here in LA. He's a writer now. And to the right is an image, once again, and thinking about this idea of assemblage and rascuache and all these other things. This is actually done by the artist Bruce Conner, who was a Bay Area artist who was out here a lot during that time, was very close friends with Berman, and had the idea in the early 60s to go to Mexico to make some work, and thought that he could find a lot of materials there. And ultimately, when he got there, he realized that a lot of the people used a lot of things over and over again. So he really didn't have a lot of materials there. And sticking with this kind of rascuache attitude on the other side of the border. But he did make a series of assemblages. Actually, I believe his last assemblages were made there. This would be an example of one of them. So it's a nice, and going back to all these different layers and connections, which I thrive on with my work. It's an interesting kind of bit of history. For Hither Poets Chop Their Fingers Served Under Glass, I work a lot with display cases. I work a lot with archives. In this case here, there's a lot of references to my grandmother, which there's those photo booth images are of. And that's my mom on the bottom right with my brother on the canals in the early 60s. The text in the center is by a writer named Stuart Perkoff. And as a result of being able to do this residency at the Hammer, I got to go into UCLA Special Collections where they have Perkoff's writings and stuff, and I was able to use some documents and things for the installation. And so I make these installations or collages, as I've been doing lately, with a bunch of kind of disparate images and different things, usually from the same period. So here's the installation here. and it's of all kinds of different things that I found. There was a series of collages here. Um, my grandmother did a lot of during that time. She worked in many kind of local pottery places and did a lot of uh, like art on pottery. She painted the pots for a lot of this kind of, kind of kitschy mid-century. There was a whole slew of these businesses out here. Sasha Brasso, California Originals. They were just all over the place. And if you've seen this stuff now, you would see it usually on the back of the pot. It has like where it came from. And they did saucers. Here's these kind of saucers here that she did. I forgot the name of this place, but it was based in Santa Monica. The glazing and things like that. And I'm not hip with ceramic lingo, but a lot of these things I used that were in the family for a long time, or that I found in thrift stores since then. And I incorporated into the installation. So there's these folders that are on the top of the cases that are essentially kind of talk about all the material that's in these cases and all around the installation. These walls I found actually on site. So I find a lot of stuff, just kind of around. I have a pickup truck and I put it to good use. There's one kind of performance I wanted to talk about in relationship to that project. This is actually some stills from a Twilight Zone episode called 5 Characters in Search of an Exit from the early 60s. And I wanted to kind of redo this in a kind of performative piece. And so there was this small ante room that was kind of, you can see it in this back image. Well, actually right there to the right, there's this little room in there that I was able to use. And so I had a lot of working drawings for this project that I wanted to show, but I didn't want to show them in any kind of traditional way. I sure as heck didn't want to frame them because there was like 500 of them or so. And so I enlisted a group of my colleagues, other artists, and we did this kind of performance piece there where we were all blindfolded in this room. And I asked them to hang this work with these working drawings that I had that were in these sketchbooks. And I'm blindfolded as well, shooting with a 35mm camera. I'm loading the film blindfolded. There was also a musical soundtrack, if you will, with 45 RPM records, right? You can see right there that I'm also kind of quote unquote DJing blindfolded. And I wanted to get an aesthetic that I envisioned to be something like this, which is exactly what they did. And somewhat chaotic and kind of crazy. And I'll show you some more of the kind of performance work. And really just kind of out of my hands, if you will. Really kind of based on these kind of chance methods, which is also, and going back to this idea of performance and that being in the air, I was doing a lot of kind of research on that as well. And it was really kind of based on this image that I found in the Getty archives. All these old images that I'm showing you of the beats, like Berman, and were taken by this artist named Charles Britton, who lived in Venice at the time. So this was like his an image that he took of like the day after one of these kind of beat parties. So this is not staged. This is what his place looked like after he had one of these kind of shindigs at the house. So that was my influence, And so after the performance was over, I kind of brought in all these other things and I made this installation. So it kind of looked like this kind of the aftermath of some party or some like really kind of crazy, event or something that took place. And with a lot of found objects, these little brown boxes in this case were actually part of a fallout shelter, the contents of a fallout shelter, which I found on eBay, and there's a busted up Eames chair, an Eames rocker that I found. Someone in Venice had a fire and they threw this out, like their house. So that was in there, and a bunch of other kind of weird stuff, the record player, all the things in there. So that was 2012. This is Ruins Over Visions, of Searching for My Lost Shaker of Salt, Anti-Drawing Room, which was done for spaghetti PSTLALA thing for LACMA a few years ago. So in keeping with this kind of found object aesthetic, I had been driving by these walls that were being thrown out at Culver High over the course of like a few weeks. And I finally, they were kind of eating away at me. And I finally started throwing them in the back of my truck, and they're pretty big. They're pretty gnarly. Some of them are like 8 by 4 feet, but I ultimately got them all to my house, to my wife's horror, and put them in storage. And then when the time came to propose an installation for LACMA, I decided to use them. And I did this piece, which was essentially this room I made for all these drawings that I did. And the drawings are of individuals that kind of came of age, celebrities mostly, and all Mexican-American that kind of came of age in the 50s and 60s, or they came of age in the 50s and 60s prior to the kind of counterculture movement and prior to the use of the term Chicano, which really comes out of like the 60s kind of anti-war movement, the farm worker movement, and all this other period of real political protest. So these people were around then, or maybe a little bit before, and some you knew were of Mexican descent, others maybe not so much, others maybe kept it hidden, like the baseball player Ted Williams, whose mother was Mexican American. But I did this series of drawings about these people, and I was really interested in that period. It's really kind of the period of my parents. My dad was born like in the mid 30s, my mom in the early 40s. So they really kind of come of age in the 50s. And that's this kind of period I've been interested in for a while, this real kind of post-war period, especially as it relates to the Mexican-American culture and really talking about these ideas of assimilation. There's a lot of things that happened around that time. For example, the big Chavez Ravine kind of debacle with, that was once a thriving Mexican-American community, but was leveled to build a Dodger Stadium. These types of things happen in the 50s. But there's also this kind of larger notion of like kind of cultural erasure, or, narratives and stories that are not part of the kind of main kind of historical framework, but that exist kind of on the margins, that really are specifically about the Mexican-American culture that I really kind of wanted to get at as well. So, like I said, I work a lot with cases. A lot of the kind of source material comes from popular media. Like I said, I'm a collector of things, collect a lot of paper as well, record albums, magazines, just tear sheets, newspaper, old photographs, et cetera, et cetera. And, a lot of the imagery for the drawings comes from this material. So here's one. I had 2 cases on either side, and one actually kind of focused on the kind of like female representation, and the other on male representation during that time. Here's some of the drawings that I made. So this is called Sister Joan. It's actually a picture of Joan Baez, the singer Joan Baez, who is of Mexican-American descent. This is called A Darkened House, Gomez outside the Garcia house. If you're like me and watch a lot of old TV growing up, The Addams Family was one of my favorites. There's a character on here, Gomez. I don't even think he's considered Mexican American. I think he's more of a from Spain or something. But I always liked that concept of just his last name. And I knew a lot of people with the last name Gomez growing up. And the Garcia house is in reference to the composer Russ Garcia, who's a very famous mid-century home here called the Garcia House, which you may or may not have seen. This one's called Only the Head Survive, for question mark, and that is Rudy. What is Rudy's last name? I want to say Martinez, but Rudy in the mid 60s changed his name legally to a question mark because he was the lead singer of Question Mark and the Mysterians, their most famous song, 96 Tears. And I kind of merged that with this old story about Joaquin Murrieta, who was a very famous bandit, if you will, in the California of the 1800s. And as the story goes, he was, he's kind of the Robin Hood for the Mexican community here, but ultimately was found and his head was chopped off and put in a glass jar and displayed in a bar in Stockton, California, which is kind of a weird story. But I always loved that story. This piece, Barbed Wire, Chain Link, and the Lasso of Truth, is of course Wonder Woman, who's played by Linda Carter, and Linda Carter is a Mexican American, born in Arizona. This one is not of anyone in particular, more of like a kind of stereotype, and we've all seen these images of like this kind of passed out or kind of sleeping Mexican. And so I have a whole slew of these images and objects. It's, you know, like, I don't know, a lot at this point. So I kind of merged them all together. There's even Donald Duck there in the center with his little nephews, or his little, I think they were his nephews. But I put all these together and created this kind of, for lack of a better term, clusterfuck of images, and colored them in. This one's called In Miles to Go Before I Sleep, of course, after the Robert Frost poem. This is Who is Vicky Carr, who was a very famous singer at that time. This one's called Hey Meester, a study for an orange Mexican. This was taken from a greeting card. So I play with a lot of space a lot. Sometimes it's like a lot of negative space. Other times it's full-blown horror vacui like this. Twisted corrido, parts of the guitar. Ghost Town of Mirrors. And this is of the singer Trini Lopez, who unfortunately lost his life due to the COVID pandemic, I believe last year or maybe the year before. Jennifer Jones, who was not of Mexican descent, but played a fiery Mexican in or a half-breed Mexican Indian in the film Duel in the Sun. So this is called Spanish Rice, which that's what the recipe's for in the background. This one's called Obliteration Poem, Architectural Horror Vacui, of the actor Anthony Quinn, and an image of him doing Shakespeare. And of course, Zorro. This one is called Blue-Eyed Soul. They died with their faux mustaches on. That image of the gentleman there is of actually Paul Newman from an early film. I think it's called The Fury, I believe. And then of course the Frito Bandito, who was a very famous character in 1960s America, and was ultimately kind of banished because the Mexican American community thought of him as a negative stereotype. This is Wonky Honky Tonky Without Donkey, When Jerry Met Larry. And this is Larry Storch and Jerry Lewis, two comedians from the era. Two very different images, just from the same time, but kind of a mirror image of themselves. The films were unrelated. And here's some more. Anthony Quinn is in there somewhere. Mickey Mouse. This one's called Obliteration Poem, TV Lamp. I did a whole series on Anthony Quinn called Obliteration Poem. March Against Dick. This was actually the most famous, or most popular, I should say, drawing in the show, just based on the kind of social media things, you know. And I'm assuming this was done at the time of the kind of ascent of Donald Trump and the early days of the presidency and the presidential election. It just happened. The Women's March, it just happened. So, you know, people really kind of connected to this image. And plus I had it in a very kind of like a central place in the installation. But March Against Dick was actually a march against Richard Nixon, brought on by the was it Chicago Moratorium Peace Action Council in the early 70s. But I think people put the pieces together and really kind of made it for now. And talking about things that were happening. Here's another one. What was this one called? Fiesta Highlights, Mexican Birthday Party. So a lot of stuff I take, you know, some of it is not you know, images of people, but just like language and text and different things. Sam Samudio, lead singer, Sam the Sham and the Pharaohs. This one is of Vicky Carr again, playing Vicky Carr in a black Crown Vic all over Los Angeles at night. So these are made with carbon and graphite, sometimes with colored pencil or watercolored pencil. This is of the DJ Wolfman Jack, who was not of Mexican descent, but had a very famous Mexican rock and roll radio show on the Mexican American border, on the border in the 50s, that had a signal so large it went to the vast majority of the country. So a lot of people listen to that show. Though I'm dressed in rags, I'll wear sable one day. This is of the Tex-Mex singer Freddie Fender. And I think this is the last one here. What if we die? Can we leave then? Dave's not here. What if we die? Can we leave then? I actually heard that on like NPR, I think, during the early days of like in the Trump administration of the taking away of children or you know, detaining and putting people that had just crossed the border into these detention centers. So this kid asked the mother, you know, if we die, can we leave then? You know, and then Dave's not here is in relationship to a Cheech and Chong, very famous Cheech and Chong comedic sketch. So there are 50 drawings in here in this series, 50. I did 60 and I want to do actually 96. So I haven't drawn since then. I really got burnt out after that experience, and I haven't touched the pencil since. I've been doing a lot of collage work. So I'm going to breeze through this in about 3 or 4 minutes. This is kind of recent work. I did, you know, once kids were starting to be taken away from their parents on the border, I did these detention centers. This is when we were under lockdown. Of course, many of us got a lot of things in the mail. I had an abundance of cardboard, and so I did these sculptural pieces. The images in here, the vast majority of them come from a Party City catalog that I had, you know, junk mail. And so I worked with those images. Here's a little ghost hung on a wire there. So they're somewhat interactive. This cleaning lady, this I was not from that Party City catalog. I had it from somewhere else. It was a funny image. So here's these. I think there's 7 of them in the series. And then a related series of collages. Ooh, I had these Planet of the Apes things I found in a trash dumpster in 2003 in my first studio post Otis, post BFA. And I didn't know what to do with them. I had them all those years. And then one day I looked at them differently. I looked at the cage or the bars and not the apes. And then it all kind of came to me in a blind fury. And I did these in the course of like a day or 2. And once again, these are after the kind of things happening at the border. And I have a huge image archive that grows and grows and grows and grows. So I never have to look too far for imagery. I 99.9% of the time I get my images from printed material. So I don't look online for images. I look online for like eBay and I buy stuff. But all this stuff comes from newspapers or old books or old magazines. It's very important for me to have that stuff and not stuff taken from online. I'm of a generation that you know, enjoyed an old book and magazines and a library card and other things. So you know, I like books. So the El Paso letters, collaboration with the artist Victor Estrada, who's a friend of mine. We were both kind of, you know, haunted by Trump and been wanting to work together on some things, and did some drawings. So, you know, I wanted to do something while Dopey Trump was in office. So Victor has his roots in El Paso. Of course, the El Paso shooting happened during Trump's kind of reign. So there's the very famous image of him with the thumbs up in the hospital with the orphan child. So I started doing these drawings and sending them to Victor one at a time in the mail and during the lockdown, and then he started doing what he does. So the drawings of of Melania and Trump and the kid are my drawings, and then Victor did everything else. So you know, we were having this dialogue. Every once in a while we text or talk on the phone, and he was actually working on one of these when the insurrection happened in early January of last year. So there's 25 of these. And this is new. This is the current issue of the Aperture magazine, focus on what they call Latinx. And they asked me to participate, showing some of my stuff some of my images. So Rita, who's a curator at LACMA, did the little bit of writing, and I just kept sending them all kinds of things, and they edited it down. They did the curation on this imagery. Pilar Tompkins Rivas and the editor at Aperture. So this is on the newsstands now. You can get this thing. I think it's the winter issue. And then lastly, I'll just breeze through some recent collage work. This is not mine. This is by the artist Wallace Berman, who's a huge influence. But, in the tail end of last year, once again, I had these kind of surfaces for a couple of years, and I didn't know what to do with them. And then the imagery just kind of came real fast and came to me. So a lot of it kind of deals with current events, even though I'm using really old material. This is probably the newest image, which is a coronavirus testing center. And that's actually Alexander Calder in the back. So I take from a lot of different resources, Border Patrol agents and those mannequins you see in like the, brown and black neighborhoods. They're kind of headless. They are headless with, clothing on them. People in chains. There's a Native American dress and actually a Tim Hawkinson sculpture right next to it. Lucy, all-star cast, Poseidon Adventure, and on the bottom of that, it's a Mad, 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 Mad World, which is one of my favorite films, and some eagles. And that's it. I think I did that in record time. Let me see, how do I get rid of this slideshow?
Vincent, thank you so much for sharing. Lots of great imagery.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's see, how do I get rid of this? Let me try this. Okay, there you go. All right. So I think you see me again, and I see you. And are there any questions?
Yes, we have quite a few questions, so I'm just
Okay.
going to go from the top. Okay, our first question mentions that you had said you like to collect many items because they are interesting or they have certain significance. What is your favorite item that you've collected that has significance to you?
Wow. Okay. What a question. So I have a lot of stuff. If I was doing this I work out of my garage in the back. So if I was back there, I could have showed you the horrors of that space. But I don't know. I think probably, the stuff that has most meaning is the things that, family members have passed away, and, like photo albums and these things like this. That's probably the most meaningful. And those things I have, I have incorporated into the work when the work is dealing with these kind of personal or familial things. So that's probably, the stuff that means the most. But, I find a lot of interesting things. I'm a big eBay guy, so I find a lot of interesting things on eBay that deal specifically with the Mexican American culture. And, the great thing, the not so great thing and the great thing is that in terms of not so great, there isn't a lot of people looking at this history or collecting this stuff in terms of a kind of a much larger picture. And that goes for, museums and art museums and things like that. But also what's great for me is I can get these things and, for relatively inexpensive prices. And as a educator, I don't have a lot of money. So I get a lot of stuff. I get a lot of really good deals on things that really are just kind of there and kind of no one wants, or no one thinks about wanting them. So I scoop them up and I incorporate them to the work.
We have another question. What is your favorite time period of art that you like or have collected?
Yeah, like I said, when I was a young person, like in high school, I had a very influential high school teacher, a guy by the name of Marco Elliott. He took us on a few field trips. I was public school, LAUSD, Venice High, which I could kind of see from this window here. And so he took us to see a few shows, and one was to LACMA, a German expressionism show that really had a huge impact on me. But I also saw a show named called Cara, which is a Chicano art, resistance, and affirmation in 1990, which had a huge influence on me. And so he would take us to these things. He was an old kind of political guy from the 1960s, so he was very aware of this material and knew that there were hungry eyes in his class that would benefit from it. But so all that kind of kicked off this real love for art. If I had to choose one, it would probably be like, one of my first loves was really the art of Los Angeles and in all of its kind of manifestations. So that was, LA art and artists, 40s, 50s, 60s and on was really something I really love.
Wonderful. You mentioned Orson Welles and his filmography a bit. What's your favorite film? Are there any such films that have inspired you?
Yeah, a lot. Orson Welles is great, and Touch of Evil is a really fantastic film. If I had to choose my favorite film, I don't know. A film that I loved growing up and that I still love to this day, and it's funny because I could take a lot from this movie, is George Lucas's American Graffiti. So I saw that when I was a very young person. My older brother, who's 12 years older than me, when I was very young, we were all in the same room together. He collected a lot of movie posters, and we had the original American Graffiti movie poster in our bedroom. So I grew up looking at that poster along with a bunch of other ones. But I love that film a lot. I could watch it, one of these films I could just kind of watch wherever, if I stumble on it. But in terms of my interests, in terms of music, that's a very important film for music. And also time period. That film takes place in 1962. The reason I knew that, because on the poster it says, "Where were you in '62?" And so I read that line probably a million times when I was a kid. But that's probably up there in my, top 5 or something.
Vincent, how long does a piece take you from conception to finish? Also, what type of influence does color have on you?
Color, okay. So color, so I'm not a big colorist. Those last collages had a lot of color in them. And they even had more color. And I says, there's too much color in here. So I noticed in all those collages, there was a lot of black in them. So I went back in and started getting rid of the color, and they sat there for a long time. So I'm not a real, person that incorporates color. I feel very comfortable in black and white. But what was the first part of the question?
Oh, okay. How long does a piece take you?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, so it depends. When there's a deadline, like those big shows that I've been fortunate to be included in, there was probably a deadline of anywhere from 6 months to a year, more like 6, 7, 8 months. And so even with that, which seems like a long time, I'm always working to the bitter end, because I'm always, I've always had a gig. I've always had to do other things to maintain my living arrangement. But like working now or working during the pandemic, it's been great because I've been working at my own pace, and I've kind of found a space to work in that I really like. I've been in the studio every day. And some of those series that I showed you, whether it was the grids and the Planet of the Apes thing, like I said, I found that material in 2002 in a trash bin, and I probably looked at that stuff every year since then. I go, I don't know what to do with this stuff. And then finally it hit me, in 2020. So I kind of have to wait for kind of history to catch up, or those last collages I showed you, I did the actual bases of those things like a year ago. And I think on December 31st, I did them all in one day. So sometimes it comes very quickly, other times it takes a long time. But a lot of the work I do is research based, so even that takes a long time, that phase of it.
Okay. Another question. How do you map out, I'm assuming, a project when starting the piece?
So there is a lot of kind of note taking, and I use a notebook or a sketchbook a lot. if I give you some advice, it would be to always kind of have one of those handy. Um, and even when things aren't have, like during the pandemic, I had a notebook, and there was really kind of nothing happening in terms of projects or anything. And one day I started drawing my daughter, and so then I had this, like, 2020, I have this sketchbook of just sketches of her, which, she'll have this record of her during the pandemic, by her dad. But I use a sketchbook a lot, and like that, like, that example, that's something I don't see myself using in any capacity, but it's just as a thing, it's important to not only have, like, this interest in history that I have, but also, looking at things in a more kind of topical or way. But I do a lot of kind of note taking. I would say I do a lot of writing, but I do, you know, my notebook has like stuff stuffed in it. They all look all kind of mangled and weird, and you know, the computer is a research tool. I go to a lot of thrift stores and things. I'm always looking at stuff. And of course, eBay is like a resource, a big time resource for me. So this stuff kind of all comes together. And if anything, it's kind of hard to get it all in one smooth flowing thing. It's not like a little beautiful little creek. It's like this kind of raging ocean of ideas. And, I try to survive it to get to where I need to go.
So I know you mentioned having a notebook as a piece of advice, and this is going into our next question. What's the one piece of advice that you can give us that has helped you throughout your journey?
Yeah, just kind of believe in what you're doing, even if it's seems a little weird or is not popular or whatever. Just really be kind of bullheaded in your approach to your own vision, and just stay the course. It's not uh, being an artist is not an easy thing. I think kind of through popular culture or just through kind of culture in general. We think of these artists as these kind of like, I don't know, without a care in the world, making work, being able to kind of be creative in all kinds of different situations. It's more than that. It's a real kind of commitment to what you want and need to say, and it's really kind of putting yourself out there, because it's such a personal response to the world, if you will, that it's like a heavy duty thing that you're doing and a responsibility. But I when I was a kid, and I see this in my daughter now, I was very shy, like extremely shy. And, when I started doing art, I found out that shyness kind of went away, and that I really, was that was my kind of strength, if you will, was doing stuff and making things and showing these things and really kind of standing behind these things. So, and a lot of that, was kind of wrapped up in a lot of different stuff, even kind of cultural things. But, that was the one place where I thought I could really fit in and can contribute. And, I did a lot of, I didn't do a lot of things. Like, for example, I played the drums when I was a kid, and I did that for like 3 years. And then, I just didn't do it since. I just lost it. The one thing that I've done my whole life is like art, and I never gave it up. And I hear people now go, "Oh, I drew when I was like 8 or 9, 10 years old, and then I stopped doing it, and now like I'm doing coloring books again." I never did that. I just kind of kept going. I remember my friends. I grew up with like these kind of hardened Venice cholos in the '80s, and they would make fun of me. I didn't give a shit. I was doing my thing. I just did it. I didn't care. And so I just threw all the gauntlet of like craziness, and the pushback, if you will, from society and from family. I just kept going. I just didn't care. This was the one thing. I ran with it, and I feel good about that. So yeah. If it's in you, then it's gonna happen, and you're gonna do it. And shit, do it.
Well, thank you so much, Vincent. We really appreciate you coming and talking to our classes. This was very inspiring.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah. No, thanks everyone. And it was great to be here. You guys have a great department. I know a handful of your teachers. They're all fantastic. I see them here in my little boxes. Julie, Mariana. It's just you guys are very lucky to be there. And do your thing. Make it happen. It's a good time to make work.
Thank you, Vincent. We'll be in touch via email. Thank you,
Okay.
everyone.
Fantastic.
All
Thanks,
right.
everybody.
Bye-bye.